quite a useful adaptation for liberalism, essentially to be able to infect and contaminate all these structures of social relation, kinship, and religion, and church, and all these things, and to basically say that it's liberating you from them, but really what it's doing is it's liberating you from any possibility of being able to oppose itself. And that's the whole point, even and especially if it's not conscious.
Yeah, I know that there's a Wikipedia article on totalitarian democracy, but not one on liberalism. And of course, totalitarian democracy basically boils down to whatever the current Anglo country in charge doesn't like.
The discussion that we've had this far, I think, ties in quite well as it kind of contextualizes like mold bugs analysis of. He wrote an article way back when called "Why I'm Not an Anti-Semite." He makes the argument that if you look at progressivism and American liberalism and you trace its lineage, it goes back to heretical Protestant sects that can essentially descend from the kind of proliferation of nonconformists and dissenters from the Anglican Church in Britain that ultimately become the Puritans that set up camp in the United States and go through all of these inflections.
Like, what did Jews contribute to, like, the Enlightenment? Spinoza? I can't really think of anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, it's a good point, but I think also, even if you look at the formation of American culture in particular, I mean, there's this retarded idea among white nationalists that, like, if only the Jews weren't here fucking everything up, then America would be, like, this white country that would be hyper-nationalistic. And it's just because of the Zionist Jewish conspiracy that it is how it is. Actually, that's completely false. I mean, as we've pointed out here, the reason why America is how it is because it's an Anglo country. Everything that it's doing is completely in line with the values, standards, and culture of what you would expect from an Anglo nation.
But why
they'll go on about the 1965 Immigration Act, but they'll forget the other co-sponsor of it who wasn't a Jew. They'll forget how all of the glow-in-the-dark CIA niggers are all Mormons now, and so on, all that stuff.
But I think an important thing that you have to sort of look at, if there's going to be anything beyond just analysis, if there's going to be something that's done moving forward, is why the Anglo? Why is it this particular people? Or I would say that it actually goes beyond the Anglo, and that you could extend it into the Low Countries and parts of Northern Europe. Even really, it's sort of a North Sea thing.
Definitely very similar to Anglos in regard for the whole mentality in general. Like there's a reason why the Glorious Revolution installed a Dutchman.
So I mean, if you want to carve reality at the joints, I think those joints are going to lie somewhere outside of the British Isles, and as well as around them, and in some sense through them. But why, though? Like that's really the crucial question. Why is it this part of Europe? Why is it these peoples? And what is it about them that makes it so? Why did liberalism happen here rather than in Ukraine? And if we can answer that question, maybe we can answer the question of like what comes next, and also what we can do to sort of push things in that direction.
Well, I think we already can answer that question, like with what I've already said, in addition to like the kind of notion of Faustianism, of like Northern European civilization having this progression of spiritual insights, which began with the Nominalist Revolution and William of Ockham, who I think was Dutch, right? To kind of reinforce what you said earlier.
Ockham was like actually, I believe he was British. Funny enough.
Okay.
Check,
well, there you go.
Let me just check.
It doesn't really matter, but with the Nominalist Revolution, you get the kind of the first rupture.
Oh yes, English Franciscan.
There you go. The eternal Anglo. But with the Nominalist Revolution, you get this initial rupture. There's this great book by Gillespie called The Theological Origins of Modernity that I'm like working through at the moment, which is fantastic. And it talks about how this theological development in the 13th century, in which the kind of Aristotelian realism was like disentangled from theology, And through basically meditations upon the omnipotence of divinity, problematizing our capacity to have any faith in any forms of categories of knowledge independent of their provision by the authority of the divine. And then ultimately then you get the Protestant Reformation a few centuries later, in which the category of revelation is elevated above scriptural authority and priestly interpretive authority. And these two forces are then combined with these other factors that create this anti-authoritarian, nomadic, Indo-Aryan spirit. And these things kind of reach a point of inflection in which you get the Enlightenment, you get the kind of severing of the connection of our understanding of knowledge and its relationship to divinity, as though divinity spoke being into existence. Instead, now divinity is administered to by a transcendental subject in Cartesianism or Kantianism or whatever, or even in empiricism to a certain extent. And so all of these ontological developments, cultural tendencies, create this kind of perfect storm that give rise to the kinds of moral hysterias, or at least light the fires that set a chain reaction in place that produces liberalism and humanism and all of these reactions. Now we're at this point in which we're looking back upon this and trying to make sense of it and try and find a ontological position that is itself revolutionary and innovative to kind of get out in front of this dialectic and then use that energy to hopefully be part of a trajectory, momentum that can head beyond liberalism into a post-liberal direction.
One other thing for which we ourselves are responsible is having a type of government which is a natural breeding ground for con men and liars. The Jews didn't do that to us. In fact, all Jews were banned from Britain during the period when the parliamentary form of government developed there. Edward I sent them all packing in 1290 because they were involved in too much mischief in his kingdom. And it was more than 350 years later when Oliver Cromwell, deranged by a Puritan infatuation with the Old Testament, permitted them to start trickling back in. And of course, the rat's nest of a system we have in Washington now grew out of the English parliamentary system. And so we cannot blame the Jews for the fact that we have a system of government which is so susceptible to corruption. A system in which fools are allowed to vote and knaves are allowed to hold office. And so we cannot blame the Jews for the fact that we have a system of government which is so susceptible to corruption. We ourselves are responsible. We ourselves are responsible. We ourselves are responsible.
Scendiamo in campo contro le democrazie plutocratiche e reazionarie dell'Occidente. Popolo italiano, corri alle armi!